As you see, it's a joint paper by Pierre-André, Bernard, and me. So all of us here, which is a rare event. So anyone who will ask too many questions will have to deal with 3 of us. So what we are basically after is trying to understand the growth in education of women in particularly, and also compared to women, comparing women to men in this respect. We know that the returns to schooling in the market have gone up during the last decades because of an increase in inequality. And one would expect that both men and women will react in a similar way to this market force, but they did not. What we actually see is that women reacted in a very different way than men. And we try to understand it in terms of what happens within the marriage market. So here this graph roughly tells you what is going on. By the way, this general fact is not completely known by everyone, but more and more people now are aware about this quiet revolution. Women becoming more educated than men. And you can see in this graph that it happens at several levels of education. And surprisingly, even at the higher level of education, women have overtaken men. So it's really a very curious phenomenon that most people would not even predict it. So the question is that we are trying to understand is why this is actually happened and what sustains it. Now, the question is much broader because we also want to understand not only why it happens, but what are the implications, and in particular the implications in the marriage market. And as there are more women, it affected not the marriage market in several ways. One is in the patterns of marriages. So here you look at the pattern of marriages of women for each class of women. What are the type of their husband in terms of education. So you see that in some sense, as women became more educated, they start to marry down, namely they end up being less likely to have a highly educated man compared to the past. If you look at what happened to men, actually they are more likely now to marry highly educated women than in the past. So the nature of the matching has changed as a result of this change in educational decisions.
Maybe it would be good to explain what the graph are saying.
Okay, I'm not done yet. You see, that's a problem with 3 authors. I'm not done. So this graph essentially shows 2 things at the same time. The boxes are who you marry with, condition on the fact that you are married, and the white area describes who is not married, or what's the proportion of people who are not married. And let me see if what I'm talking about is men or women. So those are men. So you see that the proportion of men who remain single is very notably high among the uneducated. And this is, by the way, a general phenomenon that I find in my studies in Denmark and in other countries. The message here is there are losers and winners in the marriage market. And the big losers are really the men with a relatively low education. In the Danish data, this also hold for people in cohabitation. Okay? So roughly, just to tell you, these people find it's not simply that they are single, they find it difficult to marry. When they marry, they divorce at higher rates. and they find it also difficult to remarry. So this vibrates through the whole, this phenomena vibrates through the whole marriage market. Now, going back to one graph that I jumped. At the same time, when the matching patterns change, which is a market phenomena, there's also something which happens within families. And here I want to address a sort of important insight of Becker's analysis of the family that often is neglected. The basic insight is the following, that what happens within families determines what will happen in the market, and what happens in the market will determine what happens within families. There's a two-way interaction between this. And one thing here, what we see, which is very surprising, that as a result of the higher education of women, the proportion of couples in which this is the green line, in which the women are more educated than the husband, has increased, while the opposite, which is the black line, have decreased. So now we have women who are more, it's not rare anymore, that women will be more educated, within couples will be more educated than the husband. Also notice the red line, which is also sort of important to remember, that have been close to 50% of the marriages by this classification that we have here. We have a classification to 5 groups, so it's a fairly fine classification. Husband and wife have the same level of education, which is sort of rare fact, but it sort of speaks to the importance of the relative educations of the husband and wife in the marriage market. So it's very common that they will have the same level of education.
They also are likely to have studied in the same place.
What?
And to have roughly the same jobs.
Same place would be more like in Sweden or in Denmark. So it's not, we're talking about large marriage market in the US. But it's an alternative point that you meet, so it has to do with meeting. And here again, maybe I should sort of, you will see it that in terms of this particular project, we are not going to follow a search environment. And I will come back to that very soon in the exposition. So there is a previous paper that was written by Murat Igun and Pierre-André Chiappori and myself earlier, in which we basically speculated in a semi-theoretical paper on the fact that all this could be related to something that women get now within the marriage market. So having higher education can pay off in a couple of ways, whether you marry or not, with whom you marry, what will be the share, what will be actually the outcome of the marriage, and what will be the share of the wife in this marriage. All those channels may give some type of incentive for women to acquire education, which possibly is higher than that of men. And this is what we plan to look at. So this paper that I'm presenting here today is an attempt to actually test this kind of thing empirically. So we had a conjecture, and now we try to test it. Now, the special challenge in this particular paper that we have this concept of returns to education within marriage. So first of all, I want to distinguish our concept from the concept that Zvika raised before. We have a very different meaning and different concept for what we mean by return to education in marriage. So what we really mean is what educated women expect to gain when they are married relative to uneducated women. Okay, so this is our concept of return to education in marriage, but we're facing the problem that this is not something like the wage that can be observed. It's something which is in some sense unobservable. So how do we know what women will get within marriage, and why do they actually expect to get more, and so on and so forth? So this is an example where you need a model, and also this paper is an example where we are very serious about the model. We have a particular model, and we go with it to the bad end. So first of all, what data are we going to use when we'll estimate the model? It's American Community Survey. So basically, we will be interested in first marriages, and first marriages which occur relatively in a narrow window, namely when the age is a maximum of 35, and for men, and for women a minimum of 16. So this is the time window, age window, in which most first marriages actually occur. And we want to analyze those first marriages with this data, where we have at the same time data on education of spouses. We know we will divide the data into different cohorts. So in each cohort, we will look what will be the marriage patterns by education. We know the education, completed education of those people. And we will look at each of these cohorts basically as a single marriage market. Okay, so it's not a dynamic model, but we observe a given phenomena in different cohorts, so over time. So the groups that we have in the data are 5, and I already showed you some result on this. So we have high school dropout, high school graduates, people with some college graduate, and advanced degrees. Our challenge is to deal with all of the richness of this data, and we are working on this, but today I mainly will focus on a narrower classification, for which we have completed the estimates, and we will deal with 3 groups of education only. And the 3 groups that we will deal with are high school dropout, people who have exactly high school, and then we aggregate all people who have college and beyond. Okay, so this will be the higher educated people, but they are mixed now together they are not so refined as this classification. Also, I should mention that we deal only with whites here, for reasons that most people don't understand. The black marriage market and the white marriage market is different, and we are not trying to resolve this very interesting and difficult issue. So what is our model? I'm sure many of you have already seen it. It's very closely related to models that Lucius is working with. But I want to say something about the approach. So the approach here is matching without frictions. So there's no search friction in the model. So the issue is not really to find a spouse. So how do we explain? This is something I always wondered with. I see a couple, and I see a very tall person married to a very short woman, and I ask myself, how did it happen? You know, how this kind of strange marriages occur. And really, if you think about it seriously, there's a lot of big questions here that we don't understand. But when economists try to face these issues, basically there are two lines of attack. One, which is the search model, is basically it's random whom you met. So if I find you that, if I observe that you married to such and such a woman, this is the woman whom you met, and based on your search strategy, you decided also to stick with her. The other approach that we take, and we want to take it seriously, it's not that it is not necessarily the issue of whom you met, but it's no problem of meeting. And what we think is another, or we bring up as another possibility, is unobserved heterogeneity. The people are simply different. So if someone marries with a spouse which looks to you very strange, it simply means that he has these strange preferences. Okay? So these are basically two alternative approaches to the same thing. And they have both advantages and disadvantages. But we have been riding on the second one, and I'll let you judge after you see our results, if you like it or not, and how it would be compared to alternative. Yes.
My view of it is you're kind of going to rank people on a ladder. And if the rungs, like say, weren't too far apart, then I'd like a little bit of investment. Say, you know, a woman puts on makeup, it's going to get her to go up a lot. Even though I understand maybe then other women are going to start putting makeup on too in equilibrium. So does it like amplify the return to investment, like I guess in your case of information, more than another setup?
Well, in our case, they don't put makeup; they just acquire education.
Yeah.
So you have a cheaper signal than we have.
One thing I want to say is
Yeah.
this is transferable utility. It's not non-transferable utility. So it's not a rat race. It's not the logic that if I look slightly better than the opposite, I win or not. Because if you can, anybody can marry a top woman. It's not, but you have to pay a lot. In transferable utility.
Yeah. So you think that's kind of slows it?
So it's not. I have absolutely no reason to overinvest in makeup. I can afford any man, just if I'm willing to pay. And to pay via the transfer that takes place within the company.
But I am going to take into account if I take an extra year in their education, maybe I'm going to pay a little less to.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's exactly what this is about.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it's something like an economic price of education.
And also in this model, one basic assumption is that people view, so a given man will view all women of the same education, and these are large groups that we are talking about, as equal. So if you want, it's as if we think about men as marrying with a PhD rather than with a particular woman. Okay? So this is sort of relatively strong assumptions, but I think they make the analysis very, not so issues that's very easy, but it's very explicit. So it's very clear what we are saying and why things happen.
So Yoram, there are two sort of branches of this argument. Right? One might be the unobserved stuff like the PhD or whatever that compensates other kinds of mismatch, but the other might be some match-specific quality that not everybody.
Okay, so just to understand, the observed and unobserved is not related to the properties of the wife. So your full information is given by her education. What is the thing which is unobserved by the researcher, which is in this case the three of us. We just don't know what are the preferences, idiosyncratic preferences of each person. And we assume that in the population there is a certain distribution which we're going to estimate. And this is what drives why a certain person marries educated women and another person is just because of his idiosyncratic preferences marries another woman.
So people don't agree on the ranking of the women.
Well, maybe you could show the model.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's what these are all questions about the model revolution.
I like to answer questions, if I can. Okay. So there's all. So it's okay, John. Okay. There's also issue of timing in our model, which is important. People acquire education when they already know their preference, the idiosyncratic preferences, but before they enter the marriage market. So in acquiring education, given that you have a lot of implication of having high education, it's a big coordination problem because you don't know exactly what will happen. The outcomes will depend on who will acquire education at what level and so on. So you have to deal with all this ahead of time. So people basically form expectations about what will happen to them in the marriage market. Based on that and their knowledge of their idiosyncratic preferences, they decide how much education to acquire. And eventually, this is sort of a rational expectation model. Their expectations are realized. So the first question is, in this sequence, is what kind of preferences we assume and what people expect. So we work with this so-called general quasi-linear thing, which means that Pareto frontiers are linear. So this is transferable utility case, but generalized quasi-linearity is not so bad in terms of other implication, in terms of income effects and so on, as strict quasi-linearity, so it's something useful to deal with. We allow for the fact that eventually when people will enter into the labor market and they're in the marriage market and the labor market, their incomes will be realized, then they will make choices. All this is anticipated when you choose your education. So the choices that will make, given that their income that they will have, will be determined by this particular mechanism. You have private good, you have public goods. And one nice thing about this.
Before you switch to page 2, I just didn't understand something about the utility function that you
Yes.
put there. Is it that the pleasure you get, the utility you get out of the public good is increasing in the amount that's transferred to you? I didn't understand that multiplicative part.
Yeah, that's necessary and sufficient to get transfer utility. And you say there is transfer utility.
That QI1BQ, that part.
Yes, the marginal utility of one consumption good depends only on the public.
But the B of Q could be 1. It could be constant. It doesn't have to depend on Q.
Yes, it cannot depend on private commodities. It's something like this assumption. And by the way, this is.
No, I always thought it was weird it depended on the public good instead of just being a linear transfer.
No, there is an optimal level of public good that this couple will choose.
No, but that's not like expression. It doesn't have to depend on the capital.
That's a part of finance, right? I'm just trying to.
The B of Q.
I'm not interested. Yeah, the B of Q, big Q.
No,
thing.
the B of Q does not depend on Q. That's fine, but then it's quasi-linear, which is something you don't want to take to data because there is zero income effect for commodities except for one and so on and so forth. So that's more general than that. The more general version that's still compatible with transferable utility. And by the way, of course, everything is ordinal, so you can compose it by any kind of increasing function, increasing concave function.
So at the second period, incomes will be realized and marriages will be formed. So we know how much a single person will consume. We know what a couple will consume because of this fact that they maximize, they move their opportunity or the Pareto frontier to the right as much as possible as a function of their income. And one result of this particular specification is that the incomes of the two partners will complement each other. This is a convexity. I don't know where we show this. Just one minute.
Can I ask one thing about the big picture? Is the big picture that you're after is we see these returns to education, to the wages going up, and if I put engineer what type of differential preferences men and women have to make sense of the larger investment in women. That's the only reason of why they increase more than before. Is that the
It's not a matter of preference, it's the matter of the way the surplus will be distributed.
yeah, but that's associated to the preferences that they have.
But we are not using data on the changes in the returns to education on the labor market. We are using data on the matching patterns, like these color plans that we saw before. So the way choices have changed, and we rationalize them by backing up the preferences.
So, but still, you're saying it because women increase education more than men. I'm going to impute the only reason is that as the pie gets bigger, their valuation of the pie gets a lot larger so that they invest more. But why is it that they invest more? Yes, that's what I missed.
No, it will be.
Men and women can have exactly the same utility charge, that's not relevant.
Okay, so what is the
The fact that they will receive
The transfer.
a different transfer. But everything is given by the.
So it can be changes in the mix of education over cohorts, like women getting educated. It could be changes in preferences to over cohorts.
so if it's not changed,
It can be both. There are changes because more women are graduating from college than used to.
so isn't that part of what your theory you want to predict that?
Because we are doing really preferences. We are backing up the preferences of
Say the reason why more women go to college is because as the pie gets bigger, let's say the only exogenous thing over time is the returns to education in the sense of total productivity. Is that true? I mean, it happens all the time.
Let me try to tell you what the story is. We tried the story in the theoretical paper that Yoram was doing.
Okay.
So there is a pie, and the way the pie is shared depends on preferences, of course, but preferences are crucial. It depends on the competitive situation. Now, we model competition. We have this, and there could be some self-reinforcement in the following sense. In a situation in which there are plenty of competitive, of educated women, typically the nature of competition will mean that they will get a much larger share of the pie. But that in turn explains why they are investing much. Because now the fact that you're educated gives you such a larger share of a pie, which by itself is larger, and the return to education that you get in terms of transfer on the mortgage market are boosted.
And that's all it's in betterment educational attainment. Someone can know that and say, I have a theory of educational attainment, and that's halfway throughout, but I see the increase is larger for women, and I'm going to say, can I blame it only on a certain set of preferences and the pie getting larger, and the way they react includes even the preference includes sending more women to college, and then they renegotiate whatever the keys they transfer between to each other, but the key thing is what do preferences have to be, so when the pie gets larger, it uses a larger increase in educational attainment of women than, because the part of what you're estimating goes through the larger college attainment.
Absolutely. No, that's just, I would almost agree with what you say, with one exception.
Okay.
What matters is only the sum of utilities. It's not the preference of the husband or the preference of the wife. This is a transfer utility model. So in other words, I don't need to assume that women have different preferences than men, that women care more about education, care less about that.
So what would be the logic then of why it is that women gain more from education, that go more to college than men?
It's a general equilibrium phenomenon. The competition is completely different. In a world in which plenty of women are educated, the nature of
They're choosing to be educated, so there's
So
men
there are
choosing to be
things-
less. So there has to be something that is different in some way.
There are things like the division of surplus within the couple is driven. For instance, there is domestic production. In couples where in which the partners are educated, the division has grown more equal over time. Things like this. But
The
these are not
question is,
things
what
in
changed exogenously?
No, I think the question is what's different
I
between
don't
men
know
and
what the
women
question
that
is.
would make the woman
No, you don't.
do more?
It's not about difference between men and women. The only thing that matters is total result. They can be identical. It's really deciding that you change the game. You change the game, for instance, because you change the return to education. You change the size of the surplus. By doing so, you're changing the nature of it. You're changing the equilibrium. And it's a general equilibrium effect. There will be transfers. The theoretical model shows that you can calibrate a model that tells the story in a general equilibrium kind of framework of interest or utility that gives you the right direction and more or less the right magnitude being calibrated. This is really, can we take it to the data using econometrics and identifying by estimation of a structural model as opposed to just
Could you come back at the end with some words that carry over why references are symmetric, making the pie larger increases the rate of reproduction of women more than men?
But that's okay.
I'll
I'll address it. It's not. There's no complete symmetry in the model.
I have one question. It sounds like this, from what you're going on, like Black Americans is the perfect experiment, right? Just throw them in
Sample
jail.
size.
It has
Yeah,
to
we're
be huge.
going to do that.
Yeah.
We're going to do that with like this. We might have sample size problems, things like this.
Yeah.
Black, especially black male, black male. Is not that easy.
Yeah, but there's a huge rise in like the females' work effort and education. Attainment right there.
Let me tell you, I have an anecdote.
I wrote among blacks, women have always been better educated than men. I mean, always and not sometimes.
Maybe it's a.
Can I just tell you an anecdote? At the dinner, I was sitting next to Bob Solo's wife, who, by the way, is a complete counterexample of everything we say before, because she got a PhD. Well, she's not black, but she got a PhD back in the 60s, and she didn't stop working, and she had children, and so it's complete. And we talked about the model with her, and she gave me a summary, which I think is a very good summary. She said, in my time, so she's talking in the 60s, it was okay to be a nurse because you have a high probability of marrying a surgeon. Nowadays, you're a nurse, forget about marrying a surgeon because there is too much competition for a female surgeon, which is in the data, which is exactly this is the kind of driving force that will push.
Just to be clear, is this a model there we're multiplying by everyone? Could it have been the men?
No, so technically it's a model in which there is one equilibrium at each, for each value of the parameter, but the equilibrium can be completely different if you change the parameters, in particular if you change the return to capital, or if you change the nature of household production. I do believe now in the fact that the price of production, the engines of iteration stories, it's completely compatible with this. But it has the flavor of multiple equilibrium. Technically, it's not. But you got the situation that the equilibrium can move a lot by changing a little bit.
So.
Can I ask the question in a related way?
Yeah.
I mean, if you take this marriage market approach, the way you're thinking about it is who I could get relative to either remaining unmarried or something else or some other spouse. The issue is then what determines the level of education in this society over time. If the level for men and women is changing.
Yes.
Oh, it's a fixed point. I'm born with a vision of what the distribution of education will be. This allows me, by solving the model, to know what the return, how much I will get for any level of education that I can acquire on the marriage market. That standard matching model.
Right.
In terms, so this is what motivates my decision, but everybody's decision. And then the self-fulfillingness is that those decisions aggregated give you exactly the distribution that people have in mind. Actual expectation.
Pierre-André.
But the level can change over time?
Pierre-André.
The level of education can change over time?
Yeah.
If you change the return to education, the level of education is endogenous. So if you change the return, yes.
I want to do things. First, I want to complete my sentence, and then I will add, I think, something to this discussion. So at this particular point, I just want to note that with the particular utility function that we assume, we get something which is concave. The family optimal choice is concave in the sum of the incomes, which builds in complementarity. So on the micro level, we make it the case there is complementarity between the income of the husband and the income of the wife, indirectly between the education of the wife and the education of the man. Regarding this discussion that we had, you will see that in the model we have some driving additive parameters that we use, which allow us to deal with the following questions. Suppose the technology in the household improved, which make women more willing to marry. This is captured in the model via parameters that we estimate. And this which will make men and women behave differently at the end. So we basically estimate those forces from the data. Okay? This would be parameters that describe something which is asymmetric between men and women, allow for asymmetry between men and women in an additive way. Okay, so as I will show, the gain from marriage includes elements which are elements of commonality, so where what you gain depends on your spouse from a marriage, and elements that what you gain do not depend on your spouse, that you could get with any spouse. So if women can get with any spouse more, they will marry more. Okay? So we allow this will be basically estimated in the model. But it allows for a symmetry between men and women. Yes?
And this, something, you said that the incomes of the two spouses are complements?
Yes.
Where is that? I mean, is that?
It comes from the convexity. It can be shown that the optimal outcome is convex in the sum of the incomes. But this is just for this particular.
In the, sorry, in the magic sense.
Okay, so we just talked so far about preferences.
You could have just done it in education, sorry. Could have just assumed education levels, like Jeremy and Nezzy, that like, you get some matching that has complementarity in education.
But we estimate this. We don't want to assume to
Got
estimate, and we find them.
Got it.
So in addition, what people get from their consumption and their incomes, there's something which they get, which are those idiosyncratic preferences. They are denoted by B for women and by A for men. You see that these preferences are described by a vector. And this vector basically specifies what a given type of a man will get as an idiosyncratic premium by each type of woman that it can potentially marry. So there is as many number elements here in this vector as the types of women that he can choose. And for each particular choice, he may draw a different value. So from the point of view of the researchers, for us, this is a random vector. We don't know, but we know the distribution. And you will not be surprised that following McFadden, we are going to use here extreme value distributions. This I can skip. A common concept in this literature that it's known is the surplus function. So basically, this will be an important part of the analysis, that is something that we want to estimate. But because of transferable utility, all you care, and this is just because of transferable utility, all you care is about what the two people can get together relative to the sum of what each one of them can get alone. Okay? So this is what we will call the surplus, and we can estimate it. Okay. So here is this surplus described. The GI, the small g here, ij, is what they can get together. and then you take away from that what each one of them can get as single. It's important to understand that this surplus is something which is not so simple to identify because it depends on a lot of things, including your idiosyncratic preferences. So our goal is not so simple when we try to estimate it, but we will. So how do we proceed here? How can we actually get over all these difficulties? We use very strongly throughout the consequences of stability, okay, under transferable utility. So stable matching under transferable utility is the same as maximizing the total surplus over all possible assignment in the given society or in the given marriage market. So this ends up, this maximization problem ends up to be a linear programming issue. In some sense, integer linear programming issue. But basically think about it this way. Each person in society, and this is, I think, almost philosophically interesting description, each person in society is a resource. Each woman is a resource, each man is a resource. This resource can be allocated. If I am a man, in principle, I can be allocated to many different women in society, but only to one. So the constraint that I can marry only with one woman, of all the women I could marry, is taken into account in the maximization. Similarly, each woman can marry different men, but only one of them. So if we can then, for this particular problem, not only calculate the solution, but also calculate something which is very important, is the dual of the linear programming. The dual variable here are denoted by U and V. And there is the so-called complementary slackness conditions. So the dual variables tell us the following. If, and this is all a description of the maximization, linear programming maximization. So if it is the case that a marriage does not happen, then it must be the case that the sum of the dual prices is the sum of, is larger than the Zij is what they can get together. Because the V, these duals basically tell what is your social price. If we withdraw you for the market, what happens when you reassign people optimally. So in the equilibrium, it must be the case that those who do not match, then there will be an inequality in this case. And if you actually do match, it must be the case that you exhaust the surplus. So the UI plus Vj are going to be exactly equal to the surplus of the marriage. So those are the restrictions on the dual. Again, the interpretation of the dual variable can be, again, is usually a maximization problem. What is the social value of you being married relative to being single? Now, we find, and this is not generally known, but it happens. We noted that a while ago, that these dual variables can be written in a very compact way. So if you look at the equation at the top, it says that it is a sum of two terms. One is denoted by V, capital V with superscript ij. And this number is like like a factor, fixed factor in the statistical analysis, which we are going to estimate. And it basically represents the share that you get out of the systematic part of the marriage. The systematic part of the marriage, not including your idiosyncratic preferences. So each person gets basically at the end something which is the share of the systematic gain from marriage, plus his idiosyncratic element. And you see that those factors are not dependent on you. Okay, you cannot, if I marry into a particular group and I marry a particular wife, she cannot demand me more than I will not end up giving her more than I would give any other woman in that particular group, because it's common. All women in this group are identical as far as I'm concerned. So what she will eventually get will depend only on my class and her class, but not on her identity. Okay? So this simplifies a lot eventually the analysis. And so these factors essentially we are going to estimate because they will appear in a very explicit form in the okay, let me jump a little bit. We are going here to use the McFadden model, and we will going to have extreme value distribution, which is going to induce a multi-logit. Okay, this multi-logit will have some parameters that we are going to estimate. But if you just look at what the implication of this is, that we can't describe the probability that I is going to marry with J in terms of parameters. So one key parameter is the parameter that I just mentioned are those factors. Okay? Here it's UIJ and UIK, which appears in the formula. And the other parameter which appears here is the variances, or I should better say a variance component, which we denote by sigma I and sigma J. Okay? So the probability that a certain marriage will occur can be described, given the assumption about the distribution of the unobservable, can be described in terms of some key parameters. Okay, so one of these parameters are those factors or shares of the systematic surplus. Another parameter which will play a role here, which we did not explain completely yet, is the variance. Now, the variance comes about here because it also influences the choice. So let me just because this will be a question soon, be a little bit more specific about what we mean by variance. So the variance is the variance of the extreme value distribution. It has some elements which are completely mathematically determined and common always, which is pi squared divided by 6. Okay, this is part of the variance. And then there's another variables which regulate the variance, which appears multiplicatively. And it's called, which we denote by sigma I, the notation a little bit misleading. Sigma is not the variance itself, it's a variance component. And the actual variance of the distribution will be this fixed number multiplied by the product of this parameter, okay, which is always positive. This will be the variance of the unobserved heterogeneity in the system that faces the researcher. Now, in terms of our analysis, we don't know what this variance is. In many applications, I'm done?
Yes.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Okay, it happened.
Well, a few more minutes.
Why don't we take a few minutes?
A few more minutes, sir.
Okay.
But no questions.
Happened to me before. So, okay, so we estimate the variances. We find the variance is very different for men and women, so it matters. High variance in this model means that you are more likely, as far that you are more likely to have a high gain from the marriage. Why is that? It's like in search model when the variance is high. This is an extreme value distribution. You can get a better value out there, okay, with a high variance. So on average, you are going to be better off. So high variance is good. We find that women have higher variance than men. And at the end, this is one force that leads to the result that they get higher returns from schooling than men. I can stop here, and the rest is in the paper.
One clarification. So this is a joint CO with groups, technically, or this is like very close to joint CO JDR at the moment?
Yes, except that they have normalized all variances to
So you have
one.
additional groups on top of that.
So if you estimate this of the latest cohort, say women have more variance in taste about men and vice versa, and you apply that to a previous cohort where the wages were lower, would you get a much lower educational attainment of women? Is that something that...
No, actually, we assume that the variance do not change over
That's
time.
what I'm saying. So you just keep the same variance over time. Look, this model is estimated only on the latest cohort or on all of them?
All of them.
On all of them.
You use all the information to estimate the variance.
And by the way, you could allow the variance to vary with time cohort. The model will still be identified.
No, but what I wanted to see, part of the game,
Predictive.
some of us are playing, is to estimate it one group and say, can this tell us something about
Right.
what happened outside?
So one thing we can say, so Yoram didn't get enough into the presentation, that there are three-way interactions between the group of the man, the group of the woman, and the cohort of the, let's say, both of them. And the model we have is restricted in the way that it does not allow for three-way interaction, just for cohort effect. Cohort interacts with one of the groups, but not the other. And we explain 99.5% of the variance of the matching probabilities within this model.
With a constant variance.
With a constant variance, with some restrictions, like the complementarity in the joint surplus does not change across cohorts and so on.
You explain the rise in education?
You know, we are looking at matching patterns, remember?
Okay, so you're not right, that's what I'm saying.
We-
That's why I wanted to understand if that was part of the exercise, or
We
only the
don't
matching.
detect, Yoram, but maybe you just put the graph on the returns to education. We have like to do-
All right.
Basically, we explain the color.
Right, I think it was misled from the beginning, because I thought you were trying to explain also the rise in education. So
It
you're
has to
not
be,
explaining.
you cannot get the color pattern without more education, because they have to adapt.
So, okay, this graph here, what this is, so this is first estimated, that's from the model. What we do here is, we look, it's a different view. We look at what the wife would get with a college education in expectation, in the sense just defined by Yoram, minus what the wife would get without a college education. We do the same for men, and we do the difference. The red one is high school graduates to college, so exactly the college premium. And now we're working on doing that for the 5 instead of the 3 levels of education. What this tells you is that the difference between what the wife gets and the husband gets has been increasing regularly over decades. Now, this does not, this in a sense, it's an explanation of the difference in the sense that what they get
Out of being educated.
out of being educated within the marriage. And this is taking the situation of single as given, so this is abstracting from the gain on the marriage market. But the gain, on the labor market. The gain has been much more than what the husband has, would have gained, which meant that the incentives were different. In that sense, we explain. We don't identify, we don't redress the demand for education, but this is consistent with what we observe in terms of demand for education.
How big is your linear programming problem? Tell us, yeah, like just practical.
No, it's very, it boils down, we aggregate, so it boils down to a very simple estimating equation.
Yes, one thing is, if you want to go to microdata, those linear programs are very, very fast. Much faster than a fixed point. But in addition here.
But we did not have to do linear programming. We used the theoretical properties of the linear programming and the dual, yeah.
Well, it was in the second part of the presentation.
Can I suggest that before we leave, we thank Pierre Andre, Marco, Claudio?
So your suggestion is no more paper.
I'm sorry, I thought it was the last day.
No, Aloysius is speaking.
Aloysius.